This is Criteria.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Criteria. I'm Thomas Miras, and I'm here with my friend James Majewski.
Hey guys.
So we are here to discuss yet another Dekalog episode. Dekalog 7. We're getting there.
Yeah.
We're getting there, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is over 2/3 of the way there,
Yep.
right? I mean, 7 out of 10, whatever that is.
Yep. Almost 2/3.
70% of the way through.
Yeah. So we're kind of excited to be reaching the end of it, and not that we haven't been enjoying it, but I think,
The end is in sight.
Yes.
There's still 3 films to get through after this one.
Yeah.
And that's nothing to shake a stick at.
But they're short films.
At the outset of this,
films.
it felt like, man, this is quite a project to take on. Not just to be doing all of the films on the Vatican list, but then to individually treat of each of the 10 Dekalog films.
Right.
We went back and forth about whether that was how we were going to choose to do this, whether to just sort of how to break it up.
Right.
But looking back now, I'm glad that we've chosen to go about it this way, because each film really does warrant its own discussion.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
But certainly as we're moving through them, I feel like each film also sort of impacts the way that I'm thinking about the films that came prior. And this is no exception. Dekalog 7.
The saddest Dekalog, in my opinion.
Which is really saying something.
Based on what I remember.
Are pretty sad.
Based on what I remember of what we have remaining to us after this, I think I will say that this is the saddest of the series.
Well, do you want to just dive right in and tell us why you think this is the saddest of the series?
Well, okay. These are known for being like somewhat bleak and gloomy films. But if you actually look at how most of them end, they mostly end with some kind of like move in what you could say is a positive direction.
Right.
But this one is just heartbreaking in how it ends. Even the first one, which has like a tragic ending, still has like a hopeful ending, right? But this one also, like, it hits you more. I think, they're all kind of sad, but a lot of them, you don't necessarily, at least speaking for myself, I don't necessarily feel that like connected to the characters in the film from like the beginning of the film on, they're kind of like inscrutable or whatever. But this one, like the first one, involves a child, so it immediately gets you emotionally involved.
Yeah, and it's not exactly as though this film is told from the perspective of the child, but we are definitely very much aware of the child's perspective in all of this.
Right.
I feel like there are several moments where Kieslowski gives us these little suggestions of her perspective.
Right.
And, one of those being when they're on the train and she's looking out the window and she's sort of drawing something in the condensation on the window. And even though it's not explicitly suggested to us what might be going through her mind, the question does seem to be posed, what's going through her mind.
Right.
When they're underneath the bridge and she's looking at the water, there's just something in the expression of her face that suggests to us that she's having her own experience of everything that's going on. And it's a very limited experience because she's not aware of the sort of more adult, aspects of this story, but it's no less intense for it. In fact, one of the first lines that we get from her is her asking her mother, "Have you kidnapped me?" Like in the storybooks.
Yeah.
And so that's a clue for us that she's viewing this through like the prism of the fairy tale,
Yeah.
And that's intense. So I guess this is a good point to just pause and catch our listeners up to what's going on in this film for those of you who have not seen it.
Okay, so for those who haven't been familiar with this series, we've been discussing Dekalog, a Polish TV miniseries series of short films based on the 10 Commandments. So this is number 7, Thou shalt not steal.
Yep.
And this story is about a young woman, Micah, who in the backstory of the film, she had a relationship or some kind of, however short-lived or long-lived, I don't know. But she had a relationship with her young high school teacher. And she got pregnant and had a child. And this is, I think, 6 years ago in the events of the film. So she's probably she's said to have been 16 at the time. So she'd be 22 when this film is taking place. And the child is now 6 years old. What happened is that basically her mother kind of took over the raising of this child and the role of mother, and in fact even got herself declared the child's biological mother by a doctor. So this girl Micah is feeling like she has been co-opted, and having her role as a mother and her identity and probably her way of dealing with what happened to her stolen. And she decides to run away with her daughter, who doesn't yet know whose daughter she really is. Although pretty soon after they run away, she reveals, I'm your real mother. So that's the premise of the film. Yeah. And it's quite sad.
Yeah. Well, because by the end of it, right, spoiler alert, if you don't want to find out the end of this film, stop listening now or skip ahead 2 minutes or something, but
or just stop listening now.
But yeah, by the end of it, we've got Micah on a train leaving for who knows where, and the young daughter staying behind with her grandparents.
Yeah.
Who, at this point the cat's out of the bag. She knows that they're not her real parents, but for all intents and purposes, these are her real parents.
Yeah, right. So that's kind of the concept of the movie is, with the seventh commandment is she, at one point she asks I can't steal what's not, she says, can I steal what's mine? Implying her daughter is hers, so she can't be guilty of stealing her, but she is stealing something from her, which is a sense of stability, essentially.
Yeah.
And to grow up with the parents that for the first 6 of her years of her life, she is known as her parents.
Right.
So regardless of the injustice of the situation, which you could debate, I suppose, that's the situation now, and she has to deal with that. And I don't know that she does confront it, actually. Mm-hmm. She, at one point, she takes the child to, they go and crash momentarily with the father of the child, who now no longer teaches and lives out in the woods and makes teddy bears for a living. And he kind of sees how needy she is with her daughter, and he says, you're gonna hurt this child with how, I forget his exact words, but
your hysterics.
Yeah.
And,
she's begging her to call her mommy instead of by her name. And she's just putting a lot of psychological baggage onto this kid. And he tells her that. And I don't know that she accepts that. Mm-hmm. But what happens is that she's waiting at the train station, getting ready to take a train out of town, and her parents catch up with her, and the kid runs to them, and at that point she just runs, gets on the train, and leaves. And that's the end of the film. And it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking, but I do think that it's not without its own kind of hope. So many of these Dekalog films have ended in this way, mm-hmm. where it's just a really brutal ending, so much so that it verges on nihilism. If you weren't a very careful or attentive viewer, you might be tempted to think that this is a film with, if
you weren't Polish.
Yeah, right.
Maybe.
You might be tempted to think that this is a depressing, without hope and without any values kind of film, mm-hmm. for any one of these. But as we've seen so far in this podcast, that's so far from the case. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's true here. I think that at the end, there's so many reasons for hope. She's letting go of her daughter, at least for the moment, right? I think that in the events that unfold prior to this climactic ending, it becomes very clear that she's not really doing this for her daughter, right? Now, like, you can debate the justice of what she's doing. It might even be that she's doing the right thing in taking her daughter out of this situation, which admittedly has gotten weird. She tells a story about early on her mother, finding her mother breastfeeding her daughter, and it's like, what's that about? Because she's obviously not producing milk. So there's clearly, for both of them, the grandmother and the mother,
there's a psychological need going on.
So anyway, for us as an audience, we're aware that this isn't really about the daughter, and what's good for her. Wojtek, the father of the girl who's been absent for all these years, he recognizes that too. And that's why ultimately, in the end, he calls the grandmother and tells her where they've been and helps the grandparents to track her down. So it's a good thing, right? That she's letting go of her daughter, at least in this way, not, dragging her into what is at bottom, like, her own kind of pathologies and need for figuring herself out and what's been done to her. I'm sympathetic to her. I'm not saying that like this is her fault necessarily, but that's good. The daughter, on the other hand, is back with her grandparents, right? A mother and a father, or a grandmother and a grandfather, right? There's stability. There's, like what Wojtek says, she needs her bed and her toys and her milk. Yeah. And through the events of this film, we've seen her sleeping, in a pile of teddy bears and being woken up in the middle of the night and brought somewhere else, and then being outside and having to go to the bathroom in the bushes, and it's like, this is not stability, right? Right. And she runs after the train, right? And it's heartbreaking to see that. But there's also something encouraging in that gesture, in that final running after the train. There's an acknowledgement. She might not be able at that point to call Micah mother, right? She might not be able to really process and accept this woman who she's always known as her sister, I guess. Right. Yeah. To be her mother, but there's real affection there. There's a real closeness, and the story's not over, right? So nobody's dead, nobody's out of each other's lives forever. I think that there's the suggestion that this is just the next step to what's going to be a long path of negotiating what any of this means. Yeah. So that's why I take a little bit more of an optimistic look at this. I think that probably the best thing that Micah can do at that point is take herself out of the situation and get some space, right? Right. We haven't talked a lot about Wojtek, the father of the child. It's interesting that she's the one that he's the one that she goes to. Yeah. Right. She hasn't seen him in years. Yeah. But I think that
he says 3 years. Yeah. I think. So since the kid was about 3.
Yeah. So, what that's about, I suppose we can speculate, but my thought is that it's the implicit recognition on her part that her daughter, whose name we haven't said yet, Anya, Anya needs a father. Right. Right. And I think that there's a hope that he'll be on board, right? We're given to understand that early on she pushed him away, and he points out to her that she's either or, yeah, that there's no in the middle. Yeah, that's right. And so she was totally on the side of her mother and her parents and going this one route, and now she's totally on this other side.
That's right. Yeah.
Listen, from his perspective, it all hinged on her and the choices she made. I don't know that that's really true. Right. Because one of the ways that I view this film is that this is a film about the failures of fathers. both Micah's father and Anya's father. I mean,
Yes,
it's interesting that these characters are included at all, right? Like, because we don't really need them. Why does Kieslowski and Pusevich, like, why do they decide to include Wojtek as this, like, central character?
Right. So the thing is, like, the active protagonists of this film are the active characters in this film are the mother and the grandmother.
Right.
But, like, in the background, you have these men, and that in itself is kind of a statement that these men are not actually taking initiative, taking active roles, despite the fact that they did in fathering these children.
That's right.
And we see this with Micah's father.
The film opens, we get these shots of the apartment complex, and, you know, by this time I'm asking myself, like, how many ways can we possibly shoot these apartment buildings?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
But we hear this child screaming, and then it cuts to inside the apartment, and we see the father, the grandfather,
not
I
doing
should say.
anything.
Well, he's working on his organs. He's an organ maker, and you know, I totally get it. Like, I relate to this very much because you know, with my son, sometimes, you know, I'm in the middle of something, and I know that his mother's gonna you know, deal with whatever's going on, so I won't get up, you know. But I don't know if that's the best, like, response. But whether it is or not, what we see is a man totally ignoring the screams of this child, and that's, you know, provocative, especially for an opening sequence. Right. What unfolds after that is quite provocative because Micah runs in, tries to wake her up, fails, and then we get this really intense moment where the grandmother comes in behind, and this is all, we're being introduced to these characters for the first time. She comes in behind, pushes Micah out of the way, get out of my way, gets down, wakes up Anya and comforts her.
And she says, you can't comfort her.
Yeah.
And we should say that Anya suffers from these nightmares, like, nightly, where she's screaming and they don't really know why.
She's never told why.
So that's, like, part of the sign that, like, aside from, you know, whatever Micah might be inflicting on her by taking her away, like, there's already kind of psychological problems, you know, with this child based on the family situation.
So if right off the bat it's easy enough to understand sort of, like, what's going on here, it's a very, like, archetypal kind of relationship between the mother and the granddaughter. You know, the domineering mother is, you know, a classic type.
Totally.
But sort of more out of the spotlight are these father figures who are basically absent. And
in a way, I think I blame Wojtek less than the grandfather. I mean, he's blameworthy for impregnating his teenage student in the first place, but he, you know, it sounds like if we are to take what, you know, what's the grandmother's name? Stefan is the grandfather. Ava and Stefan. What Ava tells Stefan is that she held this over him, basically, and threatened to blow up his job and his reputation and get the law involved. If that's the case, it didn't sound like he had very much choice because, you know, he can't be involved as a father if he's in jail or whatever would happen to you. I don't know under the law, but
but I mean, like, I don't know.
You know, we should also mention the mother was the superintendent of the school where
this is a really convoluted story.
The mother was the superintendent of the school where Wojtek taught and Micah attended. So I wonder if Wojtek wasn't, you know, seducing multiple students of his.
Like that's all speculation, you know. It's like, who knows? She's already demonstrated that she's willing to lie. You know, we've already heard from Wojtek that she's not telling the whole truth.
Right.
So who knows?
Including to her husband.
Right, and she's clearly manipulative, you know. So this is an unreliable.
And she says he doesn't know anything. At one point.
Yeah. So there's, like, contempt for the fathers, but it seems to be a contempt that the fathers are happy to shoulder, you know? Like, they don't mind kind of being on the outside. In fact, like, when she's on the phone, when Ava is on the phone with Micah, the father, there's like this funny gesture of like the father coming over and lighting her cigarette. Did you catch that?
Yeah.
You know, it's like
a butler or something.
Right. He's like just there to like attend to her
Yeah.
smoking needs at that moment.
Totally.
And like at the ending, when the grandmother picks up Anya and, you know, says, "Oh, my dear," and kisses her, it's like very cringy. But what's most upsetting for me in that final image is the grandfather standing there like with this dumb smile on his face. Like, he knows everything that has transpired, you know? He knows the pain that his own daughter is going through. He knows that by rights they should give Anya back. He in fact says this to Ava at one point. We should give her back. And yet, at the end, he's looking at his wife, who's, you know, I mean, she's a little unhinged herself.
Yeah.
You know, reunited with her granddaughter, and he's smiling like this is a happy reunion.
Yeah.
And uncomplicated, you know?
But I also read it like he's relieved that they're safe.
I mean, I'm not relieved at all. Are you relieved in that
Well,
situation?
but I knew where they were. I knew they weren't like dead in a ditch.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. Because
but then they both look at Micah and they like their smiles like go off their faces.
Yeah, and he does nothing when she gets on the train.
Yeah.
Right. You know, I mean, this like he doesn't get on the train with her. He doesn't try to stop her.
It's just easier. It's just easier for them if she leaves.
Right.
Like, it's
this
a
is
problem
their
out
daughter,
of their lives.
You know? So this is like as disturbed as I am by the grandmother, I'm more disturbed by the grandfather. But you're right to point out that like from their perspective, it's not just a matter of getting this girl back. It's that there might be real danger involved, right? We get a shot of Micah and Anya on a bridge at one point, and I don't know if this was Kieslowski's intention, but to my viewing, there's kind of a kind of resonance there with suicide. You know, it's not a thought that stays in the mind for long, but there's a question of like, are they about to jump off this bridge? You know? And in fact, later when Wojtek returns to the same bridge and finds the teddy bear in the water underneath, he gets into the water himself. He wades into the water, and it's like, what's he looking for? He's not looking for tracks, right, in the riverbed. He recognizes, as do the parents, that their daughter is a little unhinged too, right?
Yeah.
And we don't know what she's capable of.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
And it's clear that she's willing to sacrifice a lot of things in terms of her daughter's well-being to get her daughter back. And there's all sorts of stories about mothers killing their children, right? I mean, this is like a Medea thing. I think that gestures are a big part of this film. They're a big part of Kieslowski's wheelhouse, but in this one in particular, you know, I've already mentioned like the opening gesture of the grandmother coming in and pushing her out of the way. It's very deliberate. It's very metered. You know, it has like its beats. She hits these marks. It's not one fluid motion, right? It's like a gesture that is timed for effect. It's almost like the killer coming up behind you with the knife. The gesture too of the grandfather coming with the cigarette lighter, right? You know, like why are these little details included?
Right.
And frankly, even things that are not so much, you know, physical gestures or things taking place on screen, but also symbols, you know, like the grandfather makes organs, and Wojtek, the father, makes teddy bears. You know, like,
Yeah, what's
what's
up with
that about? Well, I mean, you know, like, what I thought about was that he's making comfort for everybody else's children, and meanwhile, you know, basically wants to have nothing to do with his own, or totally outsources the comfort of his own, right?
Yeah.
It's clear that he cares for her, but only to such an extent, right? The father makes an organ. What is the organ known for? The grandfather makes organs, for leading the congregation in song, right? I mean, that's what I associate organs with, and but he does anything but lead his own family unit, right? He's very much in the background. And we even get that represented visually on screen all the time. The final image of them watching the train go away, it's the grandmother holding the daughter. They're in the foreground and he's in the back. So it's like so much of the storytelling that takes place in this film, I think, is done precisely in these kind of suggestive, gestural ways. And that's what I was getting at with this bridge. Why are they at this bridge? Why are we getting this shot of them standing over this bridge? You know, like, there is something kind of suggestive about it. Yeah, and one more thing I wanted to mention about sort of like the stakes and the danger that's kind of latent here is we get a scene where she tells Wojtek, he says, you know, look, you haven't done too much. Like, you haven't killed anybody. And she says, yeah, I would kill. She says that to him, you know? She says, I would kill her, referring to her mother, the grandmother. But like, if she's willing to kill, like, I don't know. So I feel like, you know, this film, really all of the Decalogues, like, I think there's a lot that can't be taken at face value, you know, that needs to be excavated a little bit. But especially this one, because without that, what are we left with? We're left with a really convoluted story and a lot of exposition. I mean, like, that's one of the difficult things about this installment is that, like, you know, like a solid like third of it is her over at Wojtek's like cabin, just like, and the two of them like rehashing all of the backstory, right? And basically just telling us. And, you know, it's handled well enough in the world of the film. You know, they haven't seen each other for several years, so maybe it stands to reason that they would kind of go over things again. But it's definitely one of the like clunkiest ways of handling exposition, you know? But with an hour-long film, what are you going to do? You got to like get a lot of information through really quickly. And in some of the bonus material, piece of it said that this was based off of a true story, basically a story that a case that he had encountered in his law practice. So, you know, like, I guess I can appreciate him wanting to import all of that complicated, you know, like all of the nuance that goes into a situation as complicated as that, where a mother can steal her own daughter from her grandmother, who is also somehow the girl's the girl's mother, you know, like, so, but yeah, like, without the help of these other kind of more suggestive or provocative or evocative, I should say, little moments, the film is kind of like really dry and kind of convoluted. You know? Yeah,
that makes sense. At the end of the film, we get this amazing response from her to Micah going away on the train. I don't know how to describe her expression. It's not just like a sad face, or like, you know, something like that. It's like there's almost an expression of like outrage.
I don't know,
like shock, and like and kind of outrage in the sense of like,
being aghast or
Yeah,
something.
I think aghast. Yeah, aghast is a good word for it.
There isn't like any strong emotion in terms of like anger or sadness or anything like that.
Right.
But it's an intense moment, and there's a lot of processing that's going on. Right?
She's aghast. She's like, maybe she's processing like my mother is leaving, or maybe she's like recognizing that something like very terrible has happened.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah.
You know? But it's not like, it's just a really interesting expression because it is like, I don't know, it's a very intelligent expression somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just like focused on her own like sadness or something. It's like she's seeing something
Mm-hmm.
Outside of her and responding to it, and kind of like there's something very, I don't know, there's something very like heightened about it. I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think it's Kieslowski obviously recognized that too by choosing to end the film on this expression.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, this is something mentioned by the film critic who writes these little mini essays in our Dekalog Blu-ray booklet.
I think it's a different critic for each one, right?
No, it's the same guy, Paul Coates. This idea that like maybe for Micah 2, the fairy tale is ending. Like Micah thinks that she can. There's a lot of bitterness to it, but she thinks that she can like take her daughter away, and there's kind of like an unreality to it.
Yeah, they'll go live happily ever after in Canada. Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
and so when she leaves, it's kind of like a return to reality in a sense.
Sure,
you know, and it's like you know, I think we know watching this film that like this is not tenable. Her plan is not really tenable.
Yeah, but we want it to be.
Yeah, but we want it to be in a way, even if we know it might not be responsible or the best thing for the kid.
We want Wojtek to reunite with her. We want them to be a family. We want them to escape together.
Yeah,
you know, like this is the ideal.
And I think that she holds out at least a little bit of hope for that, but not that much. I mean, she accepts pretty quickly when makes it clear he's not interested. But there's a little bit of her that's kind of hoping.
Well, I think that's why she goes there.
Yeah.
Of all the places that she could go. You know?
Yeah. This is one of the films in the series that takes place away from the apartment complex.
Right.
Almost the entire thing.
Right.
So that's interesting. It's one of the few, I think, where we go out in into the woods.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, another thing that gives it kind of a fairy tale quality.
Totally. Yeah, that's a good point. And he lives in the father lives in this cabin in the woods and makes teddy bears.
Yeah.
Which is a kind of fairy tale like
for sure.
thing.
For sure. Yeah, I think that, you know, I just so badly wanted to have a knight in shining armor show up, you know, if for no other reason than to mediate the relationship between this grandmother and the mother, between this mother and her child, you know, like these two women, they're fighting over this young girl, and you really get the sense that one of these men need to just step in and at least mediate that confrontation, you know?
Yeah.
If not also
very true,
you know, like lay down some rules here.
If motherhood if motherhood is like interiorly directed, and then, you know, without fatherhood, it can potentially become, it doesn't want to let go. It can potentially want to turn in on itself and just kind of reenact motherhood forever.
Right.
And it's the father who sets up the kind of the boundaries and the structure in some sense.
Sure. Yeah, and I think I watched this with my wife, and she was obviously like devastated by this one. She hated it. But one thing we talked about afterwards is that, you know, women are just built this way. Mothers, you know, are so susceptible. They're just so, I mean susceptible in the best way, you know, just susceptible to the beauty of their child and the love and the wonder and all of that, you know, and it's like you're almost not made to have those like boundaries, you know. It's
Yeah.
like it's almost like that's the flip side of the coin, you
Yeah.
know.
I mean, if you think about it too, like traditionally the mother is the one who kind of like, the father is the one who provides the house, right?
Yeah.
And the mother is the one who makes the house.
Yes.
Gives the house the character that it has.
Right.
But the father is the one who provides the house, which is to say that he provides the boundaries between
Yes.
the house and the world.
Yeah.
And when the adult children leave the house and have their own children, they, you know, the integrity of that is maintained.
Yeah. And the father has a big part to play.
The father has a big
maintaining
big
that
part
integrity.
to play in sending his
Yeah.
children out, both his sons, and in, you know, traditionally again giving consent for the daughter to marry.
Right.
So the
Right.
father is the one who kind of like is the conduit to the outer world, right?
Yeah, so, you know, it's interesting that this film is, you know, dealing with the seventh commandment. There's obviously a lot of themes that are operating here. But, you know, I think that if it's obviously apparent from the get-go that she's kidnapping this girl, right, and asking, can you steal something that is yours? What is maybe less apparent, but no less I think, of concern for Kieslowski is what had been robbed from her to begin with.
Right.
You know, because in this phone conversation with her mother at one point, where she's kind of, it's kind of like this weird blackmail, you know, it's like a weird, not blackmail, it's like a hostage situation. Like, you're going to meet these demands or you're never going to see, you know, my daughter again.
Right.
But she says, you robbed me. She says, you robbed me of my daughter. You robbed me of the fact of being a mother. You robbed me of myself, of the both of you. She lists all these, the both of you being her own parents, right?
Right.
She lists all these things that were stolen from her. And I just, after my first time watching this, that was the line that stuck with me the most. And that was what I was left thinking about, was what are the sort of social conditions wherein we begin to rob mothers of their children, you know, and of the fact of their being a mother and of love. Yeah. That's something that she says. She says, you robbed me of my daughter, of my being a mother, of love, of myself. There's like a logic to the way that unfolds, of my daughter, of the fact of my being a mother, of love, of myself.
Yeah.
You know? And I think that it's almost like she's mapping out like the way this is supposed to work. She says, in fact, in the same quote, she says, things were meant to be different. Meant to be by whom? You know, if not by God, who designs us this way. Male and female, he created them. Right. You know, like that we're designed to to have children, you know, and to be mothers and to be fathers. This is the call for all of us. And that when that's denied someone, it doesn't matter what the reasoning is. The reasoning was that, oh, well, you're 16 and this is going to be a scandal. I'm the headmistress, you know, and so we can't have that. And you need to finish school. You know, how much of this rationale is precisely the rationale that goes into abortion and contraception and everything that we tell our daughters now about why they need to put off having children, why children are not a blessing, not a gift, but instead something to be afraid of. Pregnancy is a condition, you know, that needs to be treated. Right. This film got me thinking about abortion, and it got me thinking about what we deny our daughters when we deny them being mothers. And what I think we deny is precisely that which Micah maps out in this litany of the things that were robbed her. Right. The fact of her being a mother, of love, of myself. You know, that there's something that we recover or discover for the first time in having children and in caring for them. At the beginning, we see her totally impotent to wake up her daughter and to comfort her. Well, later she does.
Right.
Later she does. She wakes her up and she comforts her.
Right.
She does it in the exact same way that her mother did.
Yeah.
She does it by saying there are no wolves, but like, this might be beside the point, but like, it's interesting. She at the beginning, she says, why does she tell her about wolves? Like,
right.
She hasn't said anything about wolves.
Right.
But
right.
like, she says this to her later in the film too, that she's clearly, when she takes on the responsibility of being a mother, she discovers things and she becomes things,
Yeah.
and that she might have been able to finish school, but another thing that we start off this film with is that she's getting expelled, right? She's like,
from college.
yeah. So it's like, what good did that schooling do you, right?
Right.
If like, why have the whole world and lose yourself, Yeah. And that's what I'm thinking about with this film, is not so much like the details or the specific ethical, principles at work in a complicated situation of custody like this one, although that's very interesting and fruitful to think about too. What I'm thinking about it is like the broader implications of denying mothers their children, or
Right.
of fracturing that relationship, of disrupting it, and what's going on when we do that,
We should also mention that she says the reason her mother is the way she is, partially, is that when she was born, her mother found out she couldn't have any more children.
Yeah.
Partially because of her.
Right.
Whatever that means medically. So there's something of a, like, she says that her mother was always very cold towards her.
Yeah.
And not the way that she is towards her granddaughter.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something of a, I don't know if it's that she resents her for the difficult childbirth or whatever medical problems she may have had.
Yeah.
Due to carrying her and giving her birth. But there's clearly something of like a jealousy, something of an envy,
Sure.
a covetousness there. And, I don't know if that like adds in any way to what we've been discussing, but
well, I think that it's just that it adds another color to this larger question of why, Micah says, I know why she's like this, but there's probably a lot more to the story too. That's just one shade.
I couldn't help but think, watching this movie, of King Solomon and the the two women who come to them debating over whose baby it is, and he suggests that they cut the child in half.
That's a great point.
Which is essentially what Micah is threatening to do, in a way, by taking the child away from the mother she's known.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that what's interesting in how it's different is that, Ava, she had a daughter. So but she didn't treat her the same way that she treats Anya.
Yeah.
And then Anya is her chance to feel like a mother or something. But unlike the one woman whose child died in the story of Solomon, she had this daughter and she didn't fulfill her role as a mother.
Right.
And yet she's trying to do it now.
Right.
It's this weird
well,
dynamic.
I mean, it's ironic because she keeps saying things like, my daughter is missing. Well, that's not your daughter, but your real daughter is also missing,
Yeah.
So like,
she does call her my daughter as she leaves on the train.
Yes. So that's significant.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's interesting, Kieslowski not being a religious man and not, maybe, I don't know what his views on, gender dynamics or whatever were, but in this and in number 4, he has a pretty clear, it seems to me, he's pretty aware of the ways in which fathers can fail their daughters.
Yeah.
By not, and specifically by not taking on their proper authority.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty clear. I don't think we're reading that into
no,
either
and
of
I
these
think
films.
that fatherhood factors pretty centrally in most, if not all, of these films.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, I don't.
So there's definitely a very like, I would say traditional, except it's just human.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
view of very humane
Yeah.
and correct view of fatherhood in these films.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily you don't see very often.
Sure.
In movies.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're going to wrap up there.
Yeah.
Our next film we'll be discussing is The Mission, written by Robert Bolt, who also did A Man for All Seasons,
Right.
which we watched before, and directed by Roland Joffe. I don't know how you pronounce his name. But that's one that a lot of Catholics know and love, but I've never seen. Have you seen The Mission?
I have. Yeah.
Okay. So that'll be a new one for me. And it's got a score by Ennio Morricone.
The score is awesome.
So I'm looking forward to hearing that. So that'll be a good one. And then, you know what? I think we're probably going to do a Saint film
Hopefully.
after
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But until then, please subscribe if you watch on YouTube, and please consider donating. You can go to catholicculture.org/donate/audio, and we'll see you next time.